It seems like Digital Foundry is struggling to explain exactly why the Nintendo Switch 2 is on par with the PlayStation 4, considering their history talking about the Nintendo Switch 2. A lot of the people, other content creators, have been kind of calling them on this and saying, wait a minute, hold up, what about this and this and this? I also had a discussion on my live stream about it as well, and I think it's actually pretty fascinating because they seem set, at least, that this system was going to be like the weakest system ever. Beforehand, they talked about how the system couldn't even handle a 1080p screen. They also discussed how it was going to be significantly worse or worse than the Steam Deck. There was no chance. There was a discussion about that.
So yeah, I don't buy this concept that it's going to be more powerful than a Steam Deck or even, close to Series S. It's just not going to happen.
So they've essentially been wrong about the Nintendo Switch multiple times leading up to it. And they did admit as much in a recent podcast saying, hey, look, we didn't think it was going to be, or it's better than what we thought that it was going to be. But it does seem like they continue to potentially even undersell what the Nintendo Switch 2 is actually going to be. And they're kind of struggling to explain some of the screenshots and comparisons that we have of unfinished games at this point to the Nintendo Switch 2. So like PlayStation 4 or PlayStation 5 and comparing it just shot for shot with the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, I want to make sure that I'm very clear with saying this. I don't hate Digital Foundry. I don't think Digital Foundry is necessarily completely 100% wrong in what they're saying. I just think that it's interesting that they're kind of struggling to compare, or more like to see exactly why the Nintendo Switch 2 is on par with the PlayStation 4 and kind of ignoring some of the evidence out there that it's actually probably a bit more advanced. Now, I also will add to this, guys, is that they put a lot of caveats and a lot of asterisks. The headlines that you guys are seeing is that, yes, it's on par, roughly on par, it's on par. But they also gave themselves plenty of wiggle room to kind of sneak out of that by saying, hey, look, it's newer architecture. Hey, look, developers have modernized things. Hey, look, they went over and they've developed new processes for stuff. So even if this does turn out to be not true with it being on par, and the Nintendo Switch 2 is significantly above or a good bit above the PlayStation 4, Digital Foundry can always go back and say, hey, you know what? We did say this and this and this. We did put caveats and asterisks by everything, but I wanted to go over what they had to say in some of the games and the proof and discuss a couple of different things, because I found it, like I said, to be funny that they're kind of struggling to say, hey, look, we got this and wrong. Remember, because they did say that the Nintendo Switch 2 was going to be weaker than the Steam Deck, or not up to the level of the Steam Deck, and clearly it's past the level of the Steam Deck, and that was before the system. That was like, I think, a year ago or something like that. Yeah, it was a bit ago. They had already been saying it wasn't going to be based off of leaks and based off of, I don't know, their opinion. I'm not really sure where it came from, but clearly with the comparisons that we're seeing with what they've talked about so far, the Nintendo Switch 2 is above the Steam Deck, and it does seem like it's above the PlayStation 4. Whether it's the spec test or the eye test, I'm not really sure. So we've had a number of comparisons and stuff to go over and look at. I talked about this in a previous video of mine about, it says exactly what I was talking about with the Nintendo Switch 2. So Street Fighter 6, you look at that game, there was comparisons. That game clearly looks sharper, better on the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, Street Fighter 6 is not the most graphically intense game. It's not the biggest, baddest game out there, but at the same time, then if it was on par with the PlayStation 4, then it would look on par with the PlayStation 4. Like, I don't understand why it looks better than the PlayStation 4 if it's on par. Once again, you can use the asterisk, or you can use the, oh, well, the new processes, new different architecture, new stuff. Okay, sure, but then that means it's not quite on par then, if that's the case, right? It's not quite, if there's new things that help it perform better, then it's not on par. It's better. That's what I would think at this point. Now, next up, the funny thing, and Nintendo Prime talked about this in his video the other day, and they compared Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, and they used the PlayStation 4 version and then compared that to the Nintendo Switch 2 version. And it's like, why don't you just use the PlayStation 5 version and compare it to the Nintendo Switch 2 version? Now, maybe they wanted to highlight the differences of the lighting, and that seems to be the case with this. They're trying to highlight and talk about it right there. But at the same time, I think that it would have been good to compare it. Now, it is one thing that you have to notice, you know, the 30 frames per second, if it stays at the 30 compared to the 60 that it runs on the PlayStation 5. But everyone knows that the Nintendo Switch 2 isn't quite going to be up to the PlayStation 5 level. So there's really no point in really kind of bringing that up. We know that it's not going to be a PlayStation 5. But I know that a lot of you guys that are not subscribed to the channel are going to hit that subscribe button for this awesome discussion on this with Graphics and Digital Foundry, what they had to say. So hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and click that notification bell to get my vids as soon as they drop. Now let's continue on here, because there was a very interesting thing that pretty much we all know now at this point with the Nintendo Switch 2 and Cyberpunk 2077. This is a game that is very interesting. It's a very graphic intense game on PC and on Xbox and PlayStation, and it's a game that pretty much had a disaster version for the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. Now, it took them quite some time to actually get this game up to snuff on the PlayStation 4, to the point to where at one point it was so bad it was removed from PSN, from PlayStation 4. It was removed. You could not buy the game. It was that bad overall. They patched it up and they got it going. But there was one aspect of this game that I felt that was very interesting, because remember, Cyberpunk 2077, the Nintendo Switch version of the game, it's the complete version. It has the Phantom Liberty DLC, and that Phantom Liberty DLC is not on the PlayStation 4. Now remember, they did talk about this, and they said that technologically it would be difficult or too hard to put it on the PlayStation 4. And on the Nintendo Switch 2, they were able to get a version running apparently in about 7 weeks or so. There's been talk about it being a 7-week-old build when they showed it off at the Direct, or it actually up and running in 7 weeks. Either way, it's not like they spent a ton of time on this version of the game, and they got it up and running in what seems like 30 frames per second and up to 40 frames per second with VRR mode. And looking image quality wise, based off of the screenshots, looks like it's going to be pretty good overall. We still need to see about resolution and what's going on there, but overall, so far, so good with Cyberpunk 2077. And if the Nintendo Switch just wasn't better than the PlayStation 4 outright, I think this game would have never came with Phantom Liberty, considering what they said about that Phantom Liberty not coming to the PlayStation 4, which I found very interesting, that it could be on par with something, but somehow get something that's too technologically advanced for that. Maybe it's just slightly above it, so it was able just to squeak out enough to get that Phantom Liberty in there. I mean, I don't know, but it's running at 40 frames. Apparently they're gonna have a performance mode at that. Now, probably I think the most hilarious thing, why I think that they're kind of struggling to understand potentially what's happening with the Nintendo Switch 2, is Star Wars Outlaws. So they have one guy that's on the team that knows so much about the Snowdrop engine and Star Wars Outlaws, and he seemed to be dumbfounded, or they were all completely perplexed, how this game, that's one of the most graphically advanced games for PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series this generation so far, how is this game coming to the Nintendo Switch, going as far as to say that it is a surprising and impossible port. And one of the things that got people kind of talking a bit was like, wait a minute, how is it a impossible port before the system has even launched, and you can kind of tear everything apart and you can look and you can see in some of the other games that's being compared, how is it impossible at this point before anything's even launched? Usually when you get impossible ports, it's like the system's out and then we can talk about it, or the game's coming. But the fact that it's already an impossible port before the system's even launched and the developers have taken full advantage of what this system can do, I think that perplexed them. I think they were really struggling to kind of explain and understand how this game is going to be on there. But I do think that they undershot the Nintendo Switch so severely that it made it probably more surprising than maybe other people. Now, yes, I've seen Star Wars Outlaws. It is graphically very impressive, but I never thought that, oh my gosh, it looks so good to the point to where there's no way that it can even run on the Nintendo Switch 2. It's on Xbox Series S. Phil Spencer has talked about the profiles for stuff like Xbox Series S and Steam Deck and the Nintendo Switch 2. So I don't think anything that runs on the Steam Deck would be like, oh my gosh, it's impossible. There's no possible way in any way, shape, or form that it was ever even going to have a chance at running on the Nintendo Switch 2. So that one kind of caught me off guard. I'm not Digital Foundry. I'm not a big developer that knows everything about the tech and all of that, but I did find that surprising that they would say that, considering It's on the Xbox Series S, and it seems like, based off of what they said there, they don't know if that's the actual shot of the Nintendo Switch 2 version at the Switch 2 Direct, but apparently it looks like it might be. So we're going to have to wait and see to see what modes it has. 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second, image quality, resolution, what's going on there. And I think that they're probably going to have a ton of work in front of them, taking all of these Nintendo Switch 2 games and comparing them overall. So there was a lot of, like I said, very interesting talk with them kind of struggling to understand how this game could even happen despite it not being on PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. And I'm almost positive that Ubisoft would have loved to have this game on the PlayStation 4 and take advantage of that huge install base, considering how the game sold overall, which was not up to their expectations. So we'll see how it goes on the Nintendo Switch 2. I don't want to be completely against it and say, oh my gosh, what they're saying is complete junk or garbage. I don't think that. I think they're trying to do their best managing expectations when it comes to a hybrid platform and what you can expect, especially when it comes to frame rates and trying to keep up with the image quality and the games overall. Like, a lot of this stuff is super taxing if you need to really start layering on the graphical effects. So the Nintendo Switch 2, considering it's a hybrid device, don't expect it to be up to PlayStation 5, but I think that it's going to be above the PlayStation 4 from what we've seen, the eye test. Now we have to wait for the games to come out and everything, but the eye test shows that, yeah, it's definitely above it. And it seems like Star Wars Outlaws threw them for a complete loop overall. Now we still have to wait and see with other games. Obviously we have Elden Ring, we have Split Fiction. That's going to be a launch title, but Split Fiction, they announced that 007, that is a brand new big AAA 007 game, will be coming to the Nintendo Switch 2 as well. I think that was not necessarily a major announcement because we haven't seen anything from that game, but it was an important announcement to truly know that the Nintendo Switch can get big PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series games in the future. The thing that I've seen people talk about when it comes to Switch 1 versus Switch 2 and the power discussion and talk, some have said that, oh, that's just like the Switch 1. They said that, third-party developers, about the Switch 1. And whatever they said about it, it doesn't really matter because you need to actually see what's happening. And it's a night and day difference between what happened with Switch 1 and the launch titles or the launch first year games and Nintendo Switch 2. Look at Cyberpunk, Final Fantasy VII, Street Fighter 6. There is a number of big games already coming either at launch or in 2025. Whereas with the Nintendo Switch 1, there was nothing at launch and there was barely anything announced when it comes to major titles down the road. There was a lot of AA stuff, and it really wasn't until we got that big Doom release. That was really just like an impossible port. We knew Skyrim was coming, but remember, Xbox 360 game remastered, Doom was only on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, a newer gen game, severely compromised though compared to those versions. These versions of Final Fantasy and Street Fighter 6 and Cyberpunk definitely not as good as the best versions on PC or Xbox One X or PlayStation 5, but definitely far more comparable and I would say favorable compared to what we saw with the Nintendo Switch 1 and the ports that came out on that system from Xbox and PlayStation. So I think that Nintendo's positioned considerably better now at this point than they were, and I think that's the biggest thing to say here, the fact that this hardware is positioned better. Now we have to wait and see a number of years out. Will Nintendo do a Nintendo Switch 2 Pro? They've always done some type of new model with their smaller portable type of systems, which is a hybrid. We got the Game Boy Color, which was essentially a Pro system back in the day. We got the DSi, which was a stronger model of the Nintendo DS. We got the new Nintendo 3DS. So it's definitely possible that Nintendo decides to do some type of Pro system down the line in the future to help with the power discussion when PlayStation 6 and the next Xbox are out. But I think at the end of the day, man, a lot of developers, they don't want to hedge all of their bets on blowing everything out on graphics, and they're going to try to make sure that they have a good profile to where their games can run on a lot of different types and configurations and systems. So I see the Nintendo Switch being very relevant for a very long time when it comes to third-party support and when it comes to, of course, Nintendo putting out their big first-party titles. So I'm very excited to see the future overall, and it was just interesting to see Digital Foundry kind of squirm a little bit when it comes to things. What do you guys think overall when it comes to everything that I had to say here, in addition to some of the other stuff? I'll have links for you guys if you want to check out Nintendo Prime's video. He talked about it as well. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. All right, guys, that wraps it up for this video here. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, click that notification bell, and check out my other Nintendo Switch RPG content and more right here on screen. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you guys for the next one. Peace.